Good evening, student. Today we're going to continue talking about chapter 5 that we started last week. And I decided to do a recording because of the holiday on the May 25th. And the last lecture happened is going to be on June 1st. So I know that many people will have finals on June 2nd and probably would like to have all the material covered before, not to wait till June 1st to cover that. So I'm recording the lecture today, and we will continue on Wednesday with chapter 5. We talked last week about using a counting loop, and we said the loop basically have a 3 element whenever you have a counting loop. You have to initialize it. You need to have a counter, which is an integer variable, int count in this case. And a loop will have to do 3 things. It have to be to initialize the count to 0 at the beginning of the loop before you start the loop. Then at the beginning of the loop, you test the count, you check it if it is less than the final value. Final count is basically how many times you want to repeat the loop. So if you want to repeat the loop 5 times, right? Final count is 5, and this is going to repeat the loop 5 times. So at the beginning of the loop, you test the count to make sure it's less than the final count. Inside the loop, you do the processing. It can be as simple as displaying a message to the screen, or as complicated as computing averages and printing paycheck and different things, right? So in this case, it's a simple application that just display hello on the screen. And the third step of the counting loop is to increment the count by 1. So always a counting loop must have a 3 element. You initialize the count to 0 before the loop. You test the count at the beginning of the loop, and you update the count at the end of the loop. Always you need to do that. And we did an example. We implemented this one. And this is exactly the same code. Basically, we put 5 in here, right? And what this is gonna do, initialize the count to 0. And while the count is less than the final count, which is 5, you display hello world, add it to the list box. And what this gonna display is gonna display hello 5 times. If I run it, it's gonna display it 5 times. Okay, we're just gonna bring up the form in a minute. Here it is. This is a simple form. It has a list box. I named the list box LST output. And to add items to the list box, you say LST output.items.add and the message you want to add. So if I run it, it's gonna run 5 times. It's gonna display hello world 5 times. Here it is. Now, if you change the count, you can easily do that by changing this value to the number of times you want to execute. If you execute it 3 times, you can change it to 3, and when you run it, it's going to display the message 3 times. Okay. System is kind of slow. Okay, it's still running. Here it is. If I run it, it's going to 3 times. Okay, this is the idea in here. One thing about this thing is that if you enter a value that is basically is false to begin with, for example, if I enter for the final count, if I enter -1, right? This is not true. It's a false condition. Basically, 0 is not less than -1. So the while loop is not going to execute because 0 is not less than -1. So you're not going to get any output. If I run it like this, you're not going to get any output. So this is one of the nice things of using this form of the do while loop, which is a pretest loop. If the condition to begin with is false, you're not going to get any output, which is expected. So if I click on OK right now, you don't see anything, right? Because simply -1 is not greater than 0, right? So that's what it is. Okay. Now, There's another form of a while loop that we're going to talk about today. It's called a post-test loop. Now, a post-test loop, simply what you do is you take the while condition, right? You take that, you cut it, and add it after the loop. You add it in here. When you do this thing, you get a post loop condition. So basically, what's happening in here, you're creating a loop. This is what we had before. We had the condition was tested first, and if the condition is true, we executed the loop. This is called the body of the loop. And then we test the condition again, right? And we keep on repeating that until the condition becomes false. And when condition becomes false, you exit the loop. This is what we did in this example. This is called the pre-test loop. You do the testing, right, before you do the body of the loop. What we're doing now with this new thing, where we're putting do loop while, what we're doing is we're doing a post-test loop. So what's happening now, this is changed to something like this. So we're doing the body of the loop first. And then we test the condition. And if the condition is true, you repeat the body of the loop again. If the condition is false, you exit the loop, right? So the difference between the two, basically they are almost the same. The only difference is this. Because the body of the loop is executed first, this guarantees that the loop will execute at least one time, even if the condition is false to begin with, because you cannot test the condition before you execute the body of the loop. And that's what's going to be the difference you're going to see in here. And here, when we did this particular example, was starting with the final count being -1, which is a false condition because 0 is not less than -1. When we use the post-test form, pre-test form, do while, it didn't work, right? It didn't produce anything, right? Now in a post-test form, when we say loop while, it's going to display hello world one time, even though the condition is false to begin with. And this is one important difference between the two. A post-test loop will execute at least one time. Okay. Now, do you really need that? Not really. You could have done all the programming with a do while loop, but just telling you that there's another way you can do the same thing. Now, look at the difference in here. I say, okay, it's going to say hello world, right? In the pre-test loop, it didn't display it. So when this was in a pre-test form, in this form, it doesn't display. Simply because you're testing the condition at the beginning and it is false, so it doesn't produce any output, right? But when you put it in the post-test form, it will display it one time. So this is one important difference between the two approaches. So here it is, nothing happened with this one. Now, if you use for any other condition, they do the same thing. So if I put in here, let's say this one, make this one 2, right? Okay, which is the condition is true to begin with, all right? So 0 is less than 2 is going to produce the output 2 times, hello world 2 times, which is going to work the same way in the pre-test and post-test loop. right? So when you have the condition is true to begin with, it's going to work the same way either way. It's going to give you the same output, right? So this one is going to say hello 2 times. And when I move it here, it's going to say hello 2 times, right? But if I move it now in a post-test form again, it's going to also do 2 times. The only time it would be difference, so if I do it this way, it's going to give me hello world also 2 times. So the only time you'll get a different result if the condition is false to begin with, the post-test loop will execute the loop at least 1 time. This is one important difference between the two. So this is going to also display hello world 2 times, same as the pre-test loop. So it works the same way here, right? Now let's go ahead and we did another example. We talk about also, we talk about using what we call running total loop, right? And this is a common problem in computer science is you need to find the total and the averages, right? So in this case, we call this one a running total problem. And this one is going to require a counting loop as a previous thing. So you're going to need a count also, right? And you're going to have, however, a total to keep the totals. Like for example, you want to compute the total salaries or the total rainfalls or the total whatever temperature you have or whatever it is. You total it. You can do it average also. So total and average is the same problem. It's called the running total problem. So you need a variable to keep the total. You need a variable for the count. You need a variable for the total. You need to read values. So if you're reading, let's say, 5 values, 50, 60, 70, and 80, you need to read these into a variable. We need a value, this variable for that DBL value, right? We need to see how many total item we need to read, how many item we need to total, this int number. So in this case, it will be 5. So we read that. And if you're computing the average, you need to have a variable for that. So these are the declaration, right? First, you start by asking the user how many items he need to total or average. So we use an input box, number of items. We read that. Whatever we enter is text, right? We convert that to an integer with CINT, assign it to int number of items, right? So we're ready now to start the loop. We need to loop 5 times, depending on how many items we enter. So this is going to control the number of items in the loop, right? We do the counting loop, 3 element as before. You initialize the count to 0, you test the count, you update the count, 3 element. But now we have a running total. We have to initialize the total also to 0. So we set the total to 0 before the loop, and then in the loop we read the value. The first time we read the 50, right? Read the 50 the first time. We get that into DBL value after converting to double. We add that value to the total, and then we increment the count. So this one is going to read all the values, 50, then 60, then 70, then 80, and it's going to add them to the total. The first time total is going to be 0, you add 50 to it. And the next time it's going to read the 60, add it to the 50, give you 110. And the third time is going to read the 70, and you already have 110. So you add 7 to 110, give you 180. And then the last time you read the 80, and you have 180, it's going to give you 260. And this will be the total. So when you exit the loop, the total is going to be 260. You divide that by the count, which is 5, and they're going to give you the average. And this is basically the idea of a running total. And we implemented that in a program called test average. And basically it did this idea. So we have in here the count, the number of tests. You can change the name of the thing. Instead of number of item, we can call it number of tests, right? So you can use something meaningful. But you could have kept it number of items, right? It is so this is basically, this was called number of items. We called it number of tests because, you know, we're counting tests in here, right? And instead of DBL value, we're going to say test value, right? So we can use different name. It doesn't have to be the same. So in here, DBL test is represent DBL value, so the value we're gonna read, and then DBL total is a total that we're gonna accumulate, and we're gonna compute the average. We need DBL average. First, we ask for the how many tests. We say how many tests. We read that, convert that to an integer, assign it to int number of tests. We have a counter, so we need a counting loop, so we need to set the count to 0, initialize the count to 0, initialize the total to 0. And we have our structure loop, the same as before, int count less int number of tests. You read the next test, convert it to double, assign DBL test, and add that to the total. And then increment the count. And this is gonna do that. We're displaying the result also in the list box. So that's what this one is doing in the middle. Kind of interrupt the flow of this thing. If this kind of confuses you, you can just think that's not there. But this is what it's doing. This one's just displaying the test on the adding the test to the list box. When we exit, we compute the average by dividing the total by the number of tests, and we display that. So you can run it. You can run this one, and it's gonna basically display the result. Now, if I want, I can change this one to a post-test form. All what I have to do is take the while, copy that, cut that, and put it after the loop. And it will make it a post-test loop. Now, this will work the same, to give you the same result. The only time is not gonna be the same is if you enter like zero tests, right? Or -1 test. It's still gonna execute one time. It's not a good idea to use a post-test form, right? Yeah, but let's go ahead and run it with 2 tests to verify that it still work as it worked last time when we did this example. So again, it's a little bit slow. So do calculate, tell me how many tests. Let's say we have 2 tests. And it's gonna tell me for the test score. So I'm gonna enter in here 70 and 80. And here it is, it display them. Test score 170, test score 280, average is 75. So it's working. So it works most of the time. The only time, however, it doesn't work is if you enter for number of tests, if you enter 0, I'm gonna create a problem. So for that reason, it's not a good idea to make it a post-test loop. I think you should keep it the way it was, a pre-test loop, right? Because if you enter 0, then it doesn't do any unneeded iteration, right? Anyway, this is the thing. It's the same problem. So you can use a do while in a pre-test form, or you can use it in a post-test form. There's another way, other type of loops you can have. You can have what we call do until loop, right? The do until uses the negative logic, the opposite logic of do while. The do while will loop while it is true. The do until will loop until it is true. That means it will loop while it is false. So it uses the opposite logic, right? So, and it comes in 2 flavors, again, the pre-test loop and the post-test loop, right? Here's a pre-test loop. You say do until the expression is false, you do the statement. Or you can say do statement loop until it is true. Basically, if you want to use do until, or what you do in here is you take the opposite logic. So in here, let's say you want to say you just say do until, and then you negate that, right? What's the opposite of int count less than int number of tests? You reverse that. Instead of less than, it will be greater or equal. The opposite, greater or equal. Instead of less than, it will be greater or equal, and it's gonna work. Let's try it. So because it's gonna loop while it is false, while the count haven't reached the final, the number of items, it's gonna keep on repeating. When it reaches the number of tests, it's gonna stop. So right, it's still compiling. Here it is. I'm gonna say again, I'm gonna enter two tests, 70 and 80, and give it 75 average. So still work the same way, right? It just use the opposite logic, right? The do while you would use while it is true, it repeat. The do until while it is false, it repeat. So it is use the opposite, and you can use it if you like in a post form. You can take this one and put it in here. You can do it in a post form, and it's still gonna work, and as long as the condition is false to begin with, right? It's still gonna work, right? So if I run it again with it's gonna give you the same result, unless if you enter a condition that's false to begin with, right? Most of the time, you don't want to use a post form. The post form, you would use it if you're gonna ask a question. Do you wanna if you want to validate the input? So while the input is not valid, or you're going to ask you, do you want to run the program again? This will use it to post form. Here it is. I'm going to put in here too. If I enter again, it's still going to work okay. Right? But it's not a good idea to use a post-test loop. It's better to stick with a pre-test loop. Right? So these are the thing in here, right? So don't let this seeing too many loops confuse you. They are basically do the same thing, right? The do while use positive logic, while it is true, it repeats. The do until use negative logic, while it is false, it repeats. Both of them count in a pre-test and a post-test form. Do you really need this for loop? No, not really. You can do everything with only do while. So if you know how to use one, the other are similar. Another loop that is useful, okay? Now this one is not needed. You can do everything with a do while, but it's useful. The reason it is useful because the do while combine the three condition of a counting loop in one place. So let's go ahead and see what does this mean. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and go to the projector again. Okay, sorry. And you can see in here that we have three elements of a loop: the count, initialize the counter, test the counter, and update the counter. Three elements of the loop, right? You can put them all in one statement when you use a for loop. The for loop, nice about it is you can do it in one statement, so you can get shorter code. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. The same example, but I'm gonna using again when do counting loop, but using a for loop instead of using the while loop. So in here we're gonna declare in here them and count as integer, right? And we have also as before them and final count as integer. And this is, we're gonna set it to, let's say we're gonna repeat 5 times, set it to 5. Now, the nice thing about the for loop is you can do it in one statement. You can say for end count equal 0 or 1. You can start at 0, you can start at 1. Let's start at 0, at 1, 2, and final count step 1. And then we just say in here message box that show next. So we do that. This is much shorter code. Notice the 3 elements of a counting loop are in one place. Initialize, test, and update. You put in one statement. This is saying start with count at 1. This say end when count reaches final count. This is say increment the counter by 1. If you want to increment by 2, you can do step 2, right? Now the default step is 1, so this one is not needed. You can remove this one. If you can remove one, it's still gonna work because the default count increment is 1. So you can do it like this, very small, very shortcut, right? And you can use that also with running total problem to compute the averages and total. It can work also. It is less typing than doing this thing. Compare this one, right? Where you see 3 lines, you get what you need, right? Look at this one. You need 4 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lines to get what you need, right? So it is more typing. So this is for counting problem, for loop work nicely, but this one work only for counting problem. If you don't have a counting loop, you cannot use a for loop. For loop work only for counting problems. So let's go ahead and go to the presentation. So this is the syntax of it. For counter variable equal to the start value to end value. Optionally, you can put an increment, step increment. If you don't put an increment, it's gonna increment by 1. The default is step 1, right? Which is most of the time you're gonna increment by 1. And then you do the statement between 4 and next. Here is the example. In this case, it's counting from 1 to 10 at the increment of 1. So we're going to display hello 10 times because you're counting 1 to 10. So it is. So very simple. This is a flow chart. Okay, the flow chart of a for loop is exactly like the flow chart that you would use in a while loop. This is exactly same flow chart as this one. You initialize the count, you test the count, you execute the body of the loop, you increment the count, you loop back in. Look at the flow chart, exactly the same. You initialize the count, check the count, the final, compare the count to the final count, display hello, add 1 to the count, repeat, exactly the same. So even so, it doesn't, you're not using a while loop, it is logically it's the same as this one, okay? But you're just combining the initialize, test, and update in one statement. That's all it does. Now, you don't have to increment by 1. You can increment by different value. You can increment by 10 if you like, right? So if you do that, it's going to start at 0. Then it's going to add 10 to the step. It's going to give you then 10. Then it's going to add 10. It's going to give you 20. Then it's going to get 10 up to 100. So this will execute 11 times, producing the number 0 to 100 at increment of 10. Now, you can, if you like, use a negative increment, right? So if you want, you can count from 10 down to 1, from 10 to 1 at an increment of -1. So in this case, it's going to start at 10, then 9, then 8, then 7, 6, 5, etc., up to 1. So you can use negative increment if you like. It's very nice for counting problem. For loop is very useful, very easy to use. Now this one is basically accumulating the total between 1 and 100. Right? This is basically you don't really need to use a loop for this one. There's a closed formula for it. What you're doing in here, I'm going to go ahead and switch to the projector. What you're doing is you're doing this one. You're doing summation of I equal 1 to n of I. which is basically saying in here 1 plus 2 plus etc. all the way up to I, up to n, right? This have a closed form. This is equal to n plus 1 divided by 2. So you don't really need to use a loop. You can simply, if you want to sum the number between 1 and 100, it's 100 times 101 divided by 2 will give you the answer. You don't have to use a loop to do that, but you can do it with a loop, and that's what he's doing in here. He's using a loop to accumulate this number from initially in total is 0, and then you count from 1 to 100, you add the count to it. So you're adding 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 100 to get the total. This one you can do it with a loop, or you can simply do it using this formula, n times n plus 1 divided by 2. That means for n equal 100, it's 100 times 101 divided by 2 would give you the answer, basically. And then display the total. Now, you can, if you like, terminate a loop early, break from a loop early by using the exit statement. So if you are inside the loop and you want to exit the loop, let's say something terrible happened in your code and you have to terminate the program inside the loop. You can say exit do to exit the while loop, or you can say exit for to exit the for loop. So you can use exit do to exit the do while or do until loop, and exit for to exit the for next loop. Now, that being said, many programmers don't like to use the exit statement because it bypasses the normal flow of execution of instruction, which can create bugs in your program, which become hard to debug and find errors. So many people don't recommend to do that, and I think you should not use that. So, but it's a variable there. Use this capability with caution because it bypasses normal loop termination and makes code more difficult to debug, basically to find errors in your code. So in summary, which loop is best? There's no such thing. The rule is very simple. If you have a counting problem, the best way loop to use is a for next because it's simpler. You already seen that, right? If you have problem where you have to repeat while the condition is true, use do while. If you wanna do problem where the repeat while the condition is false, use a do until. So this is basically the rule of when to use what. Now you can put a loop inside of another loop. This will create a more complex structure and can be used to solve more complex problems, right? Luckily, we're not gonna be using nested loops in this class to solve problems. So you're not gonna have problem with nested loops. Of course, if you take a following up programming class like C++, CSIT, COSCI 139, which is gonna have a new name, CS 116, you will cover nested loop. But not for this class. Here's the idea of a nested loop. You can think of a nested loop of a clock, right? The clock has 3 hands. It have the hour clock, it have a minute clock, and have a second clock. The hour clock will make 1 revolution for every 60 minutes, right? And the minute hand will make 1 tick for every 60 revolution of the second hand, right? And for every revolution of the hour, you do 36 revolution of the second, which are 60 times 60, give you 36,000. This is the idea. You have in here 3 nested loop inside of each other. You have the hour loop on the which is represent the hour hand going from 0 to 24. You have the minute in the middle, which go from 0 to 59. And you have the second going from 0 to 59, right? Now, the number of times you execute the inner loop is equal to the product, 24 times 60 times 60. This will tell you how many times the second tick in 1 day. It's going to be 24 times 60 times 60, the product of the inner loop. So the innermost loop will iterate 60 times for each minute, right? Each minute is 60. The middle loop will iterate 60 times for each hour because there's 60 minutes to an hour. Now 24 iteration of the outermost loop will give you 1400, 400 iteration of the middle of the minute loop because 24 times 60 is 1440. And is gonna also cause 86,400, which is 1440 times 60. So it's 60 times 24 times 60 times 60 will give you 86,400. And this is basically tell you how many times the innermost loop will iterate. Okay. Again, this gives you kind of more complex structure that is not very efficient, because even when you have 24, 60, and 60 iterations, you end up with about 86,000 iteration for the second loop, which is not that efficient, right? So this is an idea. But anyway, this is something that you would see more in a following programming class like C++. The other thing we want to talk about is we want to talk about a variation on a list boxes. We want to talk about multi-column list boxes, which is still a list box. All what you do is change a property called the multi-column property to true, and then you'll be able to see values side by side. You can have a checked list boxes. We'll do example on that, and you can have a combo boxes. We'll do example on that too. So a multi-column list box is a property on a list box that when you set to true, will allow you to display entries side by side. For example, if you set multi-column property to true and set the column width to 30 pixel, I guess, then it's going to display the information like that. Okay, so you can do that. It is still a list box. It just changes the way you see the output. Now, the other type of list boxes is a checklist boxes, and this one is a combination of a checkbox and a list box, right? So you have in here, for example, Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and Raleigh. They say they have checkboxes next to them. I already created this list box. I'm going to go ahead and bring it. So we have that. Okay, and notice in here you have this checklist box, and this is just a normal list box. Now, when you have that, there's a property in here called checked on click, which is by default is set to false. So let me select that first, and you would see in here check on click is false by default. What does this mean? Let me go ahead and run it, and then you see what that does this mean. Most of the time you're going to set it to true. If you put a check on click, if you set it to false, which is a default, you have to click every item twice, one time to select it, one time to check it. So which is not that convenient. Okay, so most of the time you may want to change that to true. Waiting for that to compile, then you can see what I mean. All right, so this is getting ready to run. All right, here it is. Notice if I click on Atlanta, it doesn't check it. One time to select it, another time to check it. One time to select it, another time to check it. So it's not that convenient, right? You prefer just to do it with one click to check it and to select it. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. Go to the check on click, set that to true. This is a better way to do it. So I'm going to say set it to true. When you do that, if you run it, then you just click it one time to select it and to check it, which is more convenient. So just waiting for it to compile. Here it is. You click one time. Still haven't appeared. Click one time, it's going to select it and check it. And only one time to deselect it. Right, so we have that. Now the idea in here, we want to program this one. We're going to program it in such a way that basically when we select item and click on OK, is going to display on this list box the city that have been checked, right? So when I display them in here, right? So I want to go and double click on the OK button to program this button. Right? The idea in here, the way to do it, there is a method called checked get item checked. This method get item check is going to check if the item at the specified index is checked. If it is checked, it's going to return true. If it is not checked, it's going to return false, right? Now, check list boxes are still list boxes, so you can process them using the same methods available to list boxes. So you can use the item count to see how many items you have, and you can use a for loop to go through all the item in the list box. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and use a for loop to process this list box. So we can say in here, define in here an index. And then let's use a for loop and go from index equal. I'm going to start at 0 and then go all the way to CLB, checklist boxes conversion to CLB cities. We named it CLB cities dot items dot count. But since we are counting from 0, you have to say -1. And simply we're going to check, we're going to use an if statement and see if CLB cities dot get item checked at int index. So if the item is checked at in the index, we simply gonna display that on the list box. We say lst checked cities dot items dot add, and we can add basically the city at that index. So we say CLB checklist box cities dot items dot item at int index. And I want to also display how many times this, how many cities are checked. So I want to use a counter in here and count as double as integer. And I want to set it, initialize it to 0 in here. And every time I check a city, I want to add 1 to the count. Right. When I exit the for loop, I would display how I want to display add to the list box. So let's see, checked cities dot items dot add. I want to add maybe space and then add the number of checked city. Let's see, checked cities dot items dot add. And I want to say in here int count, or first say in here checked cities. So I want to combine that using concatenate operator, combine that with int count. And maybe use a toString method. So it's going to display in here how many cities are checked. So it's going to display the city that has been checked and how many times how many cities we have checked. So if I run it, I'm going to select certain cities, and what this loop is going to do is going to check all the city that has been checked by using the get item check method. If it is checked, it's going to add it to the list box, okay, and it's going to add one to the count. And after that, it's going to display how many cities have been checked at that. So this is still compiling. All right, here it is. So let's go ahead and check in here: Atlanta, Los Angeles, San Francisco, 3 cities. I say okay, and tell you this is going to display whatever has checked. So it's going through the loop from 0 to the number of item to the item count -1. So it's going from Atlanta to San Francisco. Check it. If it is checked, it's going to add the city to the list box, and it's going to add 1 to the count. When it finishes, it's going to display the count. So tell you the city has been checked and how many cities have been checked. So it's fine. This is basically an example of using checklist boxes. So in a sense, it is like a checklist box is like a list box, but it have in addition to the items add and items count properties, it have also the get item check property. So it have additional properties also, right? So the get item checked will tell you, will return true if the item at the index has been checked, otherwise going to return false. And that's what we did in the loop. And this is the example that we just did. And this is some more code that tell you how you can count how many city has been checked by going from index equals 0 to CLB city.item.count -1. If CLB cities that get item checked is true, we add 1 to the counter and checked cities. Then at the end we display how many cities has been checked. Now combo boxes is another thing, and I did an example in here. I prepared an example to show you. So I want to go directly to it so you can see that. A combo box can come in. The first one is a list box, so there's nothing new for the first one. It's a list box, and I will explain why I'm putting it in here. The other 3 are combo boxes. What do we mean by combo box? We mean by combo box, it's a combination of a text box and a list box. So in this case, the simple combo box have a text box entries. You can enter tags, and you can select from the list. So is this drop-down combo box. You can type text, or you can select from the list, right? Now, which one give you, and you can have 3 type of combo box. You can have a drop-down list combo box, you can have drop-down combo box, and you can have symbol combo box. The way you can set it up is by looking at the drop-down type property. So in here, if you select the combo box and then look onto in the properties, you would see the drop-down style, and you can have different style from drop-down list to drop-down to simple. These are the 3 styles you can have: simple, drop-down, drop-down list. Which one you would use is this, depending what you need. If you don't wanna, let's go ahead and run it, and then you'll be able to see what I mean. I'm gonna go ahead and run it, and I'll explain the difference between each one. Now, if you don't want to allow the user to enter data, okay, you just want to restrict the input only from what you see on the list, then you have to use either a list box or a drop-down list combo box. If you want to allow the user to enter data, then you can use either simple combo box or drop-down combo box. Let me show you the difference. List box, of course, you can select only an item from the list. You cannot type any text. It doesn't give you an input box to type text. Similarly, drop-down list combo box doesn't give you an area to type text. You have to select from the list. The difference between the two is that this one uses more space because it displays all the item. This one uses less space. So depending on how much space you have on the form, if you don't have space, you can use a drop-down list combo. If you have space, you can use a list box. And this too don't allow you to enter text. If you want to allow the user to enter text, then you have to use either simple combo box or drop-down combo box. Both of these allow you to enter text. So you can enter text, or you can select from a list. Enter text or select from the list. So which one you would use depend on if you want to allow to enter text. In this case, you have to use either simple combo or drop-down combo. Or if you don't want to allow to enter text, in this case, you have to use either list box or drop-down list combo box. Which one you use depend on how much space you have on the form. So if you don't have space, you have to use either drop-down list or drop-down combo. All right. And this is basically what it is, to give you that. It is a combination, or in a sense, a combo box is a combination of a text box, so it have a text property, and a list box, which have the property of the list box. So let's go ahead and talk about the difference between them. Combo boxes are similar to list boxes because both they display a list of items for the user. Both have item counts, selected index, selected item, and sorted property. Both have item add, item clear, items remove, item remove add method. These property and method work the same with combo boxes and with list boxes. So it is, in a sense, it is a list box. So it have all the property of a list box, but in addition to that, it have more property. So it have additional combo box property. It have a combo box also function like a text box. So it have a text property. This list boxes don't have text property. The user may enter text into a combo box, or the user may select the text from a series of list box types, list box type choices. In code, we use a CBO prefix when naming combo box for combo box. Now, which one to use? Again, if you want to restrict the user to select only from the item listed, then you have to use either a list box or drop-down list box, list combo box, depending if you have a space or you don't have a space. Now, if you want to allow the user to enter text, then you have to use either simple combo box or drop-down combo box. Again, depending if you have a space or you don't have a space. You choose the one you want. Now, the other important thing that we're going to cover in chapter 5 is random numbers. Random numbers are very useful because it allows you to do simulation, where you can simulate maybe a random event, maybe for games. You use it a lot in games. You have to use random numbers. You can also use it in businesses to simulate events, such as how many customers are going to visit the bank in different time of the day and all of that. So it uses random simulations. Now, the random object is used to create random numbers. Random numbers are used in games and simulation to create random events. Computer create really pseudo-random number, not really random number. They are not really random number. If you use the way the numbers come up to be different every time you run your program is by using a seed. A seed usually is set to be the system clock. And because the system clock changes often, every time you run it, you're going to get different random number. But if you start with the same seed, you're going to get the same numbers. So they are not really random numbers. They are calculated based on the starting value, based on the seed value. To generate random number in Visual Basic, you need to declare a random object. You declare it this way by saying them rand as new random. Notice the difference in here. You have to say new, the word new, because this is an object. So you have to say as a new random. Once you declare a random object, rand in this case, then you can use that object rand to generate random integers or random floating point number. This will create a random object in memory called rand. Then the rand variable can be used to call the object method for generating random numbers. Now, rand can be used to create random integer. In this case, you would use the next method. Next method is going to give you random integers. So if you say in here, for example, int num equal rand.next, it's going to generate a random integer between 0 and over 2 billion, which is most of the time not what you want. most of the time you want to generate random integers between an upper limit. So for example, if you generate a random integer between 0 and 99, you set the upper limit to 100. So you can see rand.next of 100. This is going to give you a random integer between 0 and 100. Okay, now this is maybe to you may sound okay, well, this is not what I want really. I want a random number between not 1 and not 0 and 99. I want a random number between 1 and 100. How would I get that? Right? The idea is you can do shifting. So you can do shifting. So in this case, if you say in here random dot next of 100, it's going to give you a random number between 0 and 99. To get a random number between 1 and 99, you would add 1 to it. So if you add 1 to it, this is going to give you a random number between 1 and 100. It's called shifting, right? So basically, let's say you want a random number between 10 and 15, right? Well, what you do is you take the difference. How many items do we have between 10 and 15? You have 6 items, right? So I have 6 items. This is equal actually to 15 minus 10. Okay, this is 5. Then you add 1 to it, plus 1. This is how much you have. So if you want a random number between n and m, is the number of items you're going to have is going to be m minus n plus 1. And the shift you have to start at n. So basically the idea is you would say rand dot next, and then you say in here m minus n plus 1, and then you add to that the starting value. You're going to start at 10 at n plus n. All right. So when you generate a random number between 10 and 15, you would use rand next, right? 10 minus 15 plus 1. I mean 15 minus 10 plus 1 is going to give you 6. And then you shift it by 10. You're going to start at 10. They're going to give you a random number between 10 and 15. So often you need to do shifting. You can do shifting to do what you need, and based on what you're doing. For example, if you want to generate, simulate the maybe throwing a dice, right? If you want to roll a dice, right? Then you have 6 outcomes, right? So you would have to say rand dot next 6 item, but this is going to give you 0 through 5, right? So you need to shift it by 1. The starting value is 1. We're going to give you this one a random number between 1 and 6, which is simulating throwing a dice, basically. All right, so you can do that to generate random event. This is how you do that, right? So you can, so rand.next 100 is going to give you a random number between 0 and 99. You can shift it if you like. If you shift it by minus 50, it's going to give you a random number between minus 50 and 49, right? Total of 100 value, but it's going from negative 50 to positive 49. You can generate random floating point numbers, okay, like double numbers, right? Using next double. Use next double is going to generate a random number between 0 and 1. Now to get a higher scale, you can scale it. You can multiply it by scaling factor. So if you want to get a random number between, let's say, 0 and 500, right? You multiply it by 500. So rand.next double times 500 is going to give you a random number between 0 and 500. And if you want a random number between 100 and 600, floating point number, then you scale it by 500 and you shift it by 100. You can say rand.next double times 500 plus 100. For the assignment that you're doing, you're using only the next one. You're doing random integer, so you don't get to use the next double. But this is if you generate floating point number, you use next double. Now, whenever you declare the random object with no parameter, it's going to use the time as a seed, which is going to give you true random numbers, right? But most of the time, but if you want, you can use a different seed. So if you put 1000, then you're going to get the same random number. You'll get the exact same random number every time you run it, which is boring for games. You don't want to do that when you actually putting the game in production. But when you're testing your program, you may want to put that in to know what numbers you're going to get. And then when you're done, just remove it to make it truly random, to use a system time for that. The seed value is used in the calculation that return the next random number in the series. Using the same seed value result in the same series of random numbers, right? Like in this example, if you have 1000, for example. The system time, which changes every hundredth of a second, is the preferred seed value used by a random object in most cases. So if you don't put any parameter in here, if you just say random, then it's going to use the system time, which is going to give you truly a random number, because this is changes every hundredth of a second, right? You can specify the seed value if you desire when you create the random object, like in this example. This will give you the same numbers every time you run. 1000 as a seed value generate the same series of random number. They are useful when you're testing your program, right? But when you're done testing, you may want to remove it to have different numbers every time you run the program. So let's go ahead and do an example in here. So I'm going to go ahead, and I already set up the form. And we have in here basically 2 coins. I picked up some coins from 1907, a penny from 1907, and we want to basically simulate tossing of a coin. And right now, both of these images have a visible property set to false, so they don't display when you run it. So none of them are going to show if you run it. I'm not going to run it because it's kind of slow, but if you run it, you're not going to see the coin right now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and program the coin to simulate tossing a coin. So it's going to give me either head or tail. Now, how are we going to do that, right? So first thing, you're going to declare the object them, and we're going to declare a random object, right? So you say as. The only difference is you have to say new, because this is an object, not a primitive type. So you have to say as new, and we're going to say random, right? And we need to generate a random event to basically tossing a coin. Now, when you say tossing a coin, you can have only 2 outcomes, right? So you have to use in here. Let's define in here, create an integer in here, and toss as integer. And we can, says we have 2 possible outcome. We can set ntoss to equal rand dot next of 2. This is going to give me 2 possibilities, 0 or 1, right? I need to define some constant in here. I'm going to define constant, basically head to equal maybe a 0. I have to say and another constant for the tail. So the tail is going to be 1. So 2 possible outcome, a head is a 0, a tail is a 1. I can choose it other way if you want, it doesn't matter, but probability of getting head and tail is going to be 50%. So we say int toss equal rand dot next to is going to give me a random number between 0 and 1, including 0 and 1. So we check in here an if statement. We do an if statement. If int toss equal to int hat, if it's equal to hat, then we can say in here, then we can make the picture for the head image, pic head dot visible. We can set that to true. And we can set the tail picture to invisible. Else, we'll do the opposite. You can select these. And this one false. So again, it's basic. If it is had, we make the picture had visible to be true and picture tail visible to be false. Otherwise, we make picture had to be false, visible to be false, and picture tail visible to be true. So this is going to simulate basically tossing a coin. Let's go ahead and run it, see how this works. Originally, as I indicated, I did set the visible property for post picture to false. So when you first run it, you're not going to see any of the images displayed. So it's going to compile, and then we'll try it to simulate the random event, see what would happen. And this one is going to use the system clock as a seed. So every time you run, you're going to get different event, right? Different random number, not the same series. It's going to be different time because it's using the system clock as a seed. All right, so right now nothing's showing up. I do tosscon, it's gonna give you a tail. Tosscon again is still the tail. Again, tail, 3 tail in a row. Now it's a head. So it is basically simulating a random event. All right, that's how it is. Okay, now I didn't program the exit button, and this is basically how this is work. All right, now if you want, you can, if you use in here a specific seed, right, then you're going to get the same number every time, which will be good when you're testing. So you know exactly what to expect. But we don't want to do that, so I'm going to remove this thing. So this is basically, very useful to create games. And the second extra credit assignment for chapter 5, it basically has to do with random numbers. So if you like these kind of things, make sure to look at the assignment for the extra credit assignment. Right, let's go ahead and talk more about this thing. We're going to talk about other thing. Now there is what you can, if you like, you can add a hint tooltip. In the control list is a tooltip kind of control. If you drag it to the form, this is going to add to the tray. Tooltip can be used for the entire form, and it will add to the tray. What this tooltip does, it allows you to define for each object on the form, define a hint that you can display. So if I select the image in here for the head, I can set its tooltip value to say head. And I can select the tail and set its tooltip value to tail. And I can select the toss coin button and set its tooltip value to toss coin. and I can select the exit button and select the tooltip property to exit. And what happened now is when you run it, when you move the cursor over each control, you'll be able to see the tooltip, which is useful, all right? It's similar to what you see in Windows when you move the cursor over debug, for example, or build or whatever, it tell you what each button does, right? So you can program your own window application to do a similar thing. So this is still compiling. Here it is. Now, if you move the cursor over toss a coin, you see the tooltip. It's a toss coin. With the cursor over the exit button, you see the tooltip saying exit. If I toss a coin, move the cursor over this one, tell you it's tail. Toss the coin again, move the cursor over this one, tell you it head. So you can do that to give a hint or tooltips on all of the control. You keep in mind that basically tooltip is added to the tray. It is not tied to one specific control. It is used for all the control on your phone. So you need one for all the control. When you add a tooltip to the tray, each control will have a tooltip property, so you can use to set basically the hint on that, right? Let's go ahead and continue with the PowerPoint presentation. So random seed, we talk about that, random numbers. You can, if you like, use the with statement to simplify coding. Best way to see that is through example. So in here, let's say that you have a control called txt name, and you're gonna do multiple operation on this control. You're gonna clear the text on it inside of the text property. You're gonna change the foreground and background color. You wanna change the border style. These four operations. Instead of repeating txt name, txt name, txt name, txt name, you can factor it out. Say with txt name, say dot clear, that fore color, that back color, that border style, then say end with. So you can use that. And you can use that also if you have, if you like, if you have maybe control and then you want to put like a list box, for example, and you can say lst.items, and you're using lots of lsc.item, you can factor out lsc.items, and then you can shorten the amount of text that you need to type. This is a variable. You don't have to do it to use it. You can always type this thing like this, but it's a variable if you want to use it. The tooltip, we talked about that, right? So basically a tooltip is a short text message you see when holding the mouse over a control. These are easy to set up and use in Visual Basic form. The tooltip control allow you to create concise help for other controls on a form, right? And we talk about that. The last one we're gonna do is we're gonna do an example, and I will start it out, and then we will finish that on Wednesday. Basically, what we're trying to do in here, we're gonna create a vehicle loan calculator. The idea is we're gonna create a report that looks something like this. And I wanna switch to the, projector. Okay, so we're gonna create a report like, look at this. So a person may wanna borrow a loan to buy a car, maybe $25,000 loan, right? And he have to pay up the loan in 4 years, let's say, right? So he have to make monthly payment every month to pay off the loan, right? Maybe monthly payment may come up to be $620.94 every month to pay up the loan in 4 years. Now, you want to create a payment schedule to show basically what would happen at the end of every month. At the end of month one, you paid $620, but of course, not all of it is going to go toward the principal. You're going to be paying interest. So in this case, out of the $620, you're going to be paying $185 for the first payment toward interest, and $435.52 toward principal. This is going to reduce the balance from $25,000 by $435.52 to $24,564.48. Then the next payment is you're gonna you're going to notice that the interest payment is going to decrease from 185 to 182 because the principal decreased, so the interest will decrease. And of course, the principal will increase. So as a 435 toward principal, you're going to be paying 438.75 cents toward the principal, and you're going to get a reduced balance. By the time you get to the payment number 48, your balance is going to be zero, right? Now I'm going to put that in, and I don't know what this amount is going to be, but this is going to be zero, right? So it's going to be, you're going to have a balance of zero. Now, usually at the end, you may have totals. You may have the total interest you paid, which I don't know what the amount is, and then the total money you paid for all the 48 payment, right? So you want to total them, all right? So this is an example of the different section you can have in a report. A report usually have 3 sections. A report header, which goes before the loop, right? Report detail, which go inside the loop. This is inside the loop, right? So the number 1 to 48, this is a for loop. You're going for for index equal 1 to 48, this is inside the loop. And the report footer comes after the loop. So basically 3 sections, 1 before the loop, 1 inside the loop, 1 after the loop. So this is basically the idea. The idea in here, what we have, I created the form already. It's going to look something like this. So we have in here the vehicle loan information. It's going to have the cost of the vehicle. It's going to have the down payment, and they're going to have the number of months, right? And the vehicle can be new or used, right? If you're buying a new car, maybe you pay 8.9% interest. If you're buying a used car, maybe you pay 9.5% interest. And based on what you select, new or used, we're going to set the annual interest rate, right? And then the output, the report is going to go in the LSC output section. And then we have these 3 buttons to calculate, clear the screen, and exit. Now, let me go ahead and look at the program. I already defined a program called the form, it's a procedure called the form load procedure to display the annual interest rate. Let's go ahead and look at this one. I'm going to go ahead and double click on the blank area in the form. And this is what we did, okay? First, always the interest rate you need to declare as constant, right? Because this can change. So right now it's 8.9% for new car and 9.5% for used car, but these can change. It's a good idea to declare them globally as a class level variable, a class level constant with a specific value. Now we need to have a global variable or a class level variable, DBL annual interest rate, okay? Now the form load event basically is what you get when you double click on a blank area in here. So if you double click on an empty space on the form, is going to create the form 1 load, which will execute every time you run your program. So all what this one does is gonna take the new rate value constant, which is 8.9%, assign it to the annual list, because this is what is checked. You have the new radio button checked, so we need to set the annual rate to that new rate values. So that we do in here, set TBL annual rate TBL, and then we display that on the label, LBL interest rate dot text to equal DBL annual rate dot toString and format it as a percentage. So this is this guy, so you can see the display the value in here. Now if I run this one, if I click on the run button, it should basically display 9.5% in the label, LBL annual interest rate, because that's what it's doing. It's just setting the annual rate to the new rate, which is, here it is, it displayed 8.9%. So after formatting the 0.089, which is the new rate, as percentage, is going to display it as 8.9%, which is good. Now we need to program this one. When I select use button, I want this one to change. It's not doing that. I want this one to change from 8.9 to 9.5 because it's a different rate. Now, how do we do that? Right? Let's go ahead and we have to program the rad button and change event to do that. To do that, it's simple. You go to the form and you double click any one of the two buttons. You can double click on the use one or the new one, or double click on the use one. When you do that, it's gonna create the rad use change event. And this is where you use an if statement. Okay. And you have to program only one. You don't have to program both because they are mutually exclusive. So we can do in here, we can check if rad use dot checked. If the use button is checked, then what we can do is we can basically set DBL annual rate to equal to the DBL use rate. Okay, I did, sometimes the keyboard gets stuck in here. One time equal to DBL use rate, okay? And else, if the rad use is not checked, then the opposite is true. The rad new is checked. So else, we say DBL annual rate to equal to DBL new rate. And after the if statement, we just display that. We say LBL annual rate dot text to equal to DBL new rate, DBL annual rate dot toString, and format that as a percentage. That's it. You don't need to program the rad new because they are mutually exclusive. If the rad new change, that means rad use change also. So you can do that. Let's go ahead and run it and see how this is work. Okay, so still compiling. All right, so we have that. Now let's go ahead and change. So we have the new rate 8.9%. Let's select use, change to 9.5%. If I click on new, change back to 8.9. So it's working. You don't have to program both buttons because they're mutually exclusive, so it worked nicely. All right, this is about all what I'm going to talk about today. We'll continue with this application on Wednesday, and we should finish the chapter on time. Just a reminder, the final exam is going to open up on June 2nd. All right, so it's going to be available to take the final exam. You don't have to take on June 2nd, but it's going to be available from 8 a.m. June 2nd all the way to midnight June 7th. So from Tuesday, June 2nd, 8 a.m. till Sunday, midnight Sunday, June 7th, right? The exam is going to be based on chapter 9 through 13 of Visual Basic, 9 through 13 of Technology in Action, okay, and chapter 4 and 5 of Visual Basic. About equally weighted, about 50% or about 100 point is going to be for Visual Basic, another 100 point for Technology in Action. About equally weighted. Of course, since you're taking it from home, it's going to be open book, right? So even so, you can take it any time between these two time frame, between June 2nd at 8 and midnight June 7. Once you start, you have to finish in 2 hours. So there's a time limit in here. So keep that in mind. So there's a time limit of 2 hours. So you need to finish within the indicated time limit. All right. So just saying here, a reminder. So we're going to have one more lecture. We're going to do it on Wednesday. We'll finish up creating the report about the vehicle loan application. We're going to talk about financial function to do that. So to see how you be able to compute that, and then we'll create the report. We're going to do that on Wednesday, and then we'll finish on Wednesday. On June 1st, I will be available to address any question like office hour kind of thing, but I will not do any lecture. So this way we will finish this week. So you have more time to study for the exams. But that's all what I have. You have a nice day, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Bye.